Tomorrow is Earth Day, and that I am saying these words to you from those two standpoints, the Good Shepherd Sunday and Earth Day. I am the Good Shepherd. But there are plenty of bad shepherds in Scripture. But Jesus is claiming his heritage here as a shepherd and his distinction as a good shepherd, a shepherd who serves and saves his sheep. Sheep herders were and are people who are taking care of quasi-domesticated animals who provide food and clothing. The shepherd needs the sheep as much as the sheep need the shepherd. The shepherd, having raised the sheep in captivity and rendered them dependent, has many choices about how to care for the sheep. Jesus doesn't use the word respect or love because that's not the language of Scripture, but he defines his relationship with the sheep in those terms. Respect and love is all over the relationship he talks about. Setting that aside for a minute, setting aside the spiritual and theological aspects of this gospel, I have to tell you that I have been thinking a lot about the removal of the Klamath River dams and the return of the salmon. The interdependence of the people, the land, the salmon in the Klamath lands reminds me of this gospel. And at the risk of getting too many parallels in one sermon, I'm always thinking about the ways in which the climate, the land, the crops, and the farm workers are interdependent in much the same way as shepherds and sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. The salmon and the indigenous peoples have lived together in harmony, as you know, for hundreds, even thousands of years. The salmon were not domesticated, but we domesticated the river. And that imprisonment became much more harmful to the salmon, to the people, to the water, to the trees, to the air. The balance was lost. The tribes lost their stewardship, the salmon lost their home, and the land, the trees, and the air lost their nutrients. The salmon did not know the new fisher people because they weren't fisher people. They were engineers and government officials who are not so interested in salmon. They don't know their sheep. I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. The tribes of the Klamath lands in the Pacific Northwest have lived their lives around the salmon and the water that sustains them. They see themselves as salmon people. They believe the salmon taught them to speak. They understand themselves to be linked between the Creator and the land and the water. They are careful. They have always lived in harmony with the salmon life cycle. They and the salmon flourish together. John's gospel is at pains to describe the good shepherd as someone who willingly gives his life for the sheep, who tracks his sheep and brings them into safety. We know, for instance, and this is just so touching to me, that as the season goes on, the shepherd and the sheep have to go farther and farther away to find good pasture because everybody eats down the grass that's near home. And that means they have to stay the night in the outside pastures. And that means they have to build enclosures for the sheep to keep them safe. And the shepherd sleeps across the gate of the enclosure. It's very touching. I don't want to be a sheep herder. I see that, but in that metaphor, I see that we have lost that kind of intimacy with the rest of the created world. If we take ourselves as resurrection people to be the next incarnation of good shepherds, and you know by this time that I certainly do see it this way, then we are faced with the question of how to give our lives for the rest of creation. Because we have done so much to demand that creation lay down its life for us, as though creation needs us, and not vice versa. We have been blinded by our excitement, by our enthrallment with what we can make and do, with how we can serve our desires to discover and fix. And some of that has been so helpful. And it didn't demand that we lay down our lives until maybe the last century. We've gotten so far away from the rest of the created world that we haven't noticed the extreme price that world has paid for our exciting development. The crucial relationship in this gospel between the good shepherd and the sheep is that they experience the same things. They eat, sleep, and walk together. If there's no food for the sheep, likely no food for the shepherd. If sleep is dangerous for the sheep, it's dangerous for the shepherd. It was not safe for Jesus, after all. But we don't see or hear or smell or feel the changes we have wrought. How can I see, for instance, the heat-related diseases of the farm workers who pick during the 100-degree weather the blueberries I am eating? Okay, I may be exaggerating a little, but only a little. I'm trying to make a point about needing to put my hands in the wounds, as we've been talking about vis-a-vis Thomas in the last weeks, to really develop compassion. We have to touch the wounds to feel the compassion, to be moved to action. There's a huge invitation in this gospel, and one that I think St. John's is trying to heed, little by little, to look, to touch, to hear, and to feel the impact of our lifestyle on our farm workers, on our indigenous brothers and sisters, on our land, our trees, our fish, our wildlife, and our sky, and on those of us without resources. Only when we see and touch and hear and feel what other people feel, what the land feels, what the sky feels, can we understand what they need from us. So when we go into the migrant camps or to the Reedville Presbyterian Church or to William Temple House, we are trying to see and hear and feel. Going to deliver groceries, to find shoes for kids without real shoes, to find baby clothes for mothers without resources, I can actually get to the point, as I said earlier, of not eating blueberries. Except that if I don't buy Oregon blueberries, those workers can't work. We have made grave mistakes in the way we have distanced ourselves from the rest of creation and from our suffering neighbors. But in this gospel, we are asked to understand that if we lay down our lives, that is, if we put aside for a minute our own comfort and need for acquisition, and if we stand with and extend our hands to our neighbors and our land, we will be able to take up a newer, resurrected life. That is, I think, the point Jesus was making. Yes, we have made mistakes, and it's hard to think about them. It's really hard. But I found these amazing, balmy words from Bishop Tutu. Pain can be healed, your choices can be redeemed, and your life can be blessed. I am so blessed to be among you, good shepherds, and I hope that you are blessed by being here too. May it be so.